She had learned how to be quiet long before she learned how to be strong. Every morning she woke up before the sun, not because she wanted to, but because life demanded it. The alarm rang at 5, always too loud in her small room. She reached out to stop it quickly, afraid the sound might bother the neighbors. Even though no one had ever cared if she was bothered, her room was simple. A bed, a small table, a chair with a loose leg, and a mirror with a crack running through one side. She avoided looking at that crack most days. It reminded her of how easily things could break and never fully go back to how they were. She dressed in the same routine clothes, ones that blended in, ones that never stood out. Standing out had never brought her anything good. She worked at a grocery store not far from where she lived. It wasn't a bad job, people said. At least it paid something. At least it was honest. But honesty didn't protect her from being treated like she didn't exist. She stood behind the counter for hours, scanning items, saying the same words again and again. "Hello, that will be all. Have a nice day." Most people never answered. Some acted as if she was part of the machine, not a person. There were days when customers spoke to her without even looking at her face. They talked into their phones, complained about prices, or sighed loudly as if her presence was the reason for their bad mood. If something rang up wrong, they blamed her immediately. If the line moved too slowly, it was her fault. She apologized even when she hadn't done anything wrong. Saying sorry had become easier than explaining herself. Her manager rarely spoke to her unless something went wrong. When the register was short by a few coins, the look she received felt heavy, full of doubt. When she worked extra hours or covered shifts, no one noticed. Praise never came her way. Silence was her reward. During breaks, she sat alone. Other workers laughed together, shared stories, checked their phones. She ate quietly, always finishing quickly. Sitting alone hurt less than pretending she belonged somewhere she didn't. She told herself she was fine. She had learned to say that even when it wasn't true. Outside of work, life was just as quiet. She didn't have many people to talk to. Calls were rare. Messages even rarer. When something good happened, there was no one to share it with. When something bad happened, she carried it alone. She had grown used to carrying heavy things inside her chest, stacking them one on top of another until they felt normal. She remembered times from years ago when she tried harder, when she spoke up, when she believed that effort would be noticed. Those times ended in disappointment. People listened, nodded, then moved on. Over time, she learned that staying silent was safer. Silence didn't promise anything, but it also didn't take anything away. On her walk to work, she passed people every day. They walked fast, eyes forward, focused on their own lives. No one stopped. No one asked how she was doing. She blended into the background of the street. Just another face people forgot as soon as they passed. At the store, she was careful with everything she did. Careful not to make mistakes. Careful not to speak too loudly. Careful not to upset anyone. Being careful was exhausting, but it felt necessary. One wrong move could bring harsh words, angry looks, or worse. Being reported to the manager, there were moments when she wanted to disappear completely. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet one. To fade into a place where no one expected anything from her, where no one judged her. She wondered if anyone would notice if she stopped showing up one day. The thought scared her more than it should have. At night after work, she sat on her bed and stared at the wall. The day replayed in her mind. The customer who snapped at her, the coworker who ignored her greeting, the manager who walked past without a word. She told herself tomorrow would be better, even though tomorrow usually looked the same. She wasn't lazy. She wasn't careless. She wasn't weak. But the world around her never seemed to see that. They saw a uniform, a role, a person they didn't have to respect. Over time, that treatment began to sink into her thoughts. She started to believe that maybe this was all she deserved. Sometimes, she watched people who were treated kindly. She noticed how different they stood, how they spoke, how they smiled without fear. She wondered what it felt like to be seen, truly seen, without having to prove your worth every second. There were moments when tears came without warning. She wiped them away quickly, afraid someone might see. Crying felt like failure. She had promised herself she would survive without breaking, even if surviving meant becoming invisible. One evening, after a long shift, she stood behind the counter as the store grew quieter. The lights hummed softly. Her feet ached. Her back hurt. She counted the minutes until closing. A customer raised their voice over something small. She apologized again, her voice steady even though her hands shook. When the customer left, no one asked if she was okay. No one ever did. She took a deep breath and kept working. That was what she always did. She didn't know it yet, but this was the last day her life would feel this small. At that moment, she believed this was how things would always be. Treated like nothing. Expected to accept it. Expected to stay quiet. She had no idea that soon someone would look at her differently. Someone would speak to her with respect so simple and genuine that it would shake everything she thought she knew about herself. But for now, she stood there, doing her job, unseen, unheard, and unaware that change was already walking closer. And so the day ended the way it began, quietly, with no applause, no kindness. Just another reminder that she existed in a world that rarely noticed her. She locked up her thoughts, gathered her things, and walked home under the dim streetlights. Carrying the weight of a life where respect felt like a distant dream, the next day started the same way. With the alarm buzzing early and the soft light creeping into her small room, she got ready quietly, tying her hair back, putting on the same plain clothes, and heading out into the chilly morning. The streets were calm, filled with people rushing to their own lives. She walked with her usual pace unnoticed, blending into the crowd like she had done for years. When she arrived at the store, she greeted her coworkers with a small smile. Some ignored her, some responded with nods, and some barely looked up from their phones. It didn't hurt as much anymore. She had learned to expect silence and to move on. She knew that nothing she did would make anyone see her differently. No, she had accepted that for now. The store was busy that morning, with the line stretching longer than usual. She scanned items quickly, her hands moving almost automatically. Customers complained about prices and waited impatiently, their words sharp. Some didn't even bother looking at her, talking to the air as if she wasn't standing right there. She kept her calm, speaking in the softest voice, hoping no one would notice her irritation or exhaustion. It was during that rush that he walked in. He was different from the others. He didn't rush. He didn't push or complain. He walked slowly, looking around the store carefully, as if he belonged in every corner, but also respected it. Beside him was a young girl, maybe 6 or 7, holding onto his hand tightly. The girl looked around with wide eyes, curious and bright, while he smiled gently. Speaking to her in a calm voice, when it was their turn in line, he made eye contact with her. It was brief, but it felt warm and steady, like someone finally noticed her for a moment. He said hello in a tone that sounded genuine, not forced, not polite in the way people sometimes use to hide boredom or impatience. She answered back, surprised at how natural it felt to speak with someone who wasn't hurried or critical. He spoke to his daughter softly, explaining things she asked about, not scolding or snapping. She watched, feeling a strange sense of calm. It was small, almost invisible, but it made a difference. Here was a man who treated a child with patience, who looked at her as if what she said mattered. She had rarely seen adults like that in her life, adults who believed in small kindness without needing anything in return. When he handed over the money, he smiled at her again, thanking her sincerely for her help. He didn't just say the words. He meant them. Something about the way he nodded, waiting for her reply before moving on, made her chest tighten in a way she didn't understand. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with genuine respect that it felt foreign. Like stepping into sunlight after being in the dark. The girl tugged at his hand, asking for a candy bar. He glanced at her, then back at her. He smiled at both of them, speaking gently to the girl, explaining she could have it, but they should choose carefully. The conversation was simple, yet it was full of care and attention. She stood behind the counter scanning items, but her mind wandered. She found herself watching them, wondering how someone could carry such quiet patience and warmth. Over the next few days, he returned, sometimes with the little girl, sometimes alone. Each time, he spoke to her respectfully. He didn't rush, didn't complain, didn't treat her like a machine that existed only to process groceries. Sometimes he asked simple questions about her day, questions that were short but kind, questions that invited her to speak without pressure. She answered cautiously at first, not used to people wanting to know her at all. Gradually, the small moments began to change something inside her. She looked forward to his visits, not in a romantic way, but in a way that made her feel seen. She started standing a little taller behind the counter, speaking a little more confidently. The warmth he brought into the store, without trying to impress anyone, without expecting anything, made her feel lighter. It was as if someone had opened a door she had long forgotten existed. One afternoon, a regular customer began yelling at her over a missing item. The words cut through the air, loud and angry, and her hands trembled as she tried to explain. But before she could finish, he stepped forward. His voice was calm, low, but firm. He asked the customer to wait, to listen, and then explain the situation clearly and politely. The customer grumbled, but finally backed down, leaving the store quietly. She watched, stunned, as he smiled at her. He didn't lecture or demand respect. He simply gave it to her as if it was normal, as if everyone deserved it. She felt tears rise but swallowed them, afraid to show how much the moment affected her. For the first time in a long time, she realized that respect didn't have to be earned through fear or perfection. Sometimes it could just be given freely, to anyone who deserved it. After that day, their conversations became slightly longer. He asked about her plans, her interests, small things she had never been asked about. She answered cautiously, then with more ease. She started noticing small changes in herself. She walked differently, felt less afraid to speak, smiled a little more at coworkers, even though they often ignored her. His presence reminded her that kindness could exist in the world. Even if she hadn't experienced it much, at home she thought about the visits. Replaying the small details, the way he waited for her reply, the way he treated the girl with patience, the quiet authority he had without being harsh. It was confusing and comforting at the same time. She didn't know why one person could make such a difference, but she felt it deep in her chest, like a seed planted that was slowly starting to grow. She had always believed she had to survive alone. She had built walls around herself, small walls that kept disappointment out and people distant. But seeing him, she realized that maybe walls weren't always necessary. That sometimes, letting someone in, even just a little, could show her that the world wasn't entirely cold or indifferent. The days continued in this rhythm. Work was still tiring. Some people were still rude. Some colleagues still ignored her. But there was a difference now. There was someone who made her feel that she mattered, even if only in small moments. And in those moments, she found strength she didn't know she had. She began to think that maybe, just maybe, she could hope for more than being invisible. Even the little girl noticed her. The girl waved, smiled, and sometimes asked questions about her favorite things. She didn't expect her to answer, but she did, and the girl listened intently. It felt strange being heard even by a child, but it mattered. It reminded her that respect could be gentle and quiet and still powerful. She began to notice herself looking forward to certain hours of the day. Not for the work, but for the simple interactions that made her feel human. She felt less alone in a world that had often ignored her. She even started imagining small conversations, practicing polite responses, imagining herself speaking freely and confidently. It was a small shift, almost imperceptible, but it was happening. One evening, after the store closed, she lingered a little by the counter, counting the receipts and straightening the shelves. He had stopped by for a quick visit. He didn't stay long, but he smiled, thanked her, and spoke to her daughter kindly. Then they left, waving as they walked out. She closed the door behind them and felt a strange warmth. The world outside hadn't changed, but her small corner of it felt different. She realized that sometimes smallest gestures, the simplest words could make life feel less heavy. She went home that night thinking about respect. She had never expected it to come so icily from a stranger, someone who didn't owe her anything. But here it was, quiet and steady, changing the way she saw herself. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. She felt noticed, valued, even if just for a moment. That feeling stayed with her like a soft glow that made the coming days feel a little brighter. And so, day by day, visit by visit, her world began to shift. She didn't understand why he treated her this way, but she didn't need to. She only needed to accept that sometimes people could be good, that sometimes respect could exist without reason or expectation. And as she closed her eyes that night, exhausted but strangely hopeful, she felt the first flicker of belief that maybe her life could be more than just surviving it, could be noticed. It could matter. It could have warmth she had long forgotten. One afternoon, the store was busier than usual. The line stretched all the way to the entrance, and people were growing impatient. The air felt thick with tension, and her heart raced as she tried to keep up. Scanning items, bagging groceries, and answering questions had become almost automatic for her. But the stress never went away. She had learned to stay quiet, to move quickly, to apologize even when she had done nothing wrong. That had been her routine for years, surviving in a world that didn't pause to notice her. It was during this chaos that a regular customer, known for being impatient and rude, started shouting at her. He complained about a missing item, his voice rising above the hum of the store. She froze for a moment, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to explain. Words came out in a soft, careful voice, hoping he wouldn't grow angrier. But it only made him louder, more impatient. She felt the familiar sting of embarrassment, the weight of being dismissed, the feeling that she was nothing more than a machine that could be yelled at, just as she felt herself shrinking. Someone stepped in. It was him, the single dad who had been visiting the store for weeks. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't snap or scold the customer. He simply stood beside her, calm and steady, and asked the man to pause for a moment. His voice was low but firm, cutting through the noise in a way that made people take notice. The man huffed and tried to argue, but he had a patience and quiet authority that made him impossible to ignore. He explained the situation clearly and politely, without putting her on the spot. He didn't need to speak for long. The truth was enough. He made the man see the mistake without humiliating her, without making a scene. The customer grumbled, muttering under his breath, but finally walked away. She stood behind the counter, stunned. Her hands still trembled, but she felt a strange relief. Someone had just defended her without needing to prove anything, without expecting a favor in return. It was simple, quiet, and yet it mattered more than she could put into words. When the line cleared, he turned to her with a smile. It was gentle, encouraging, full of understanding. He didn't lecture her, didn't make her feel indebted. He just gave her a small nod, an acknowledgement that said, "You are seen. You are respected." She blinked, swallowing the lump in her throat. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. She had been treated unfairly countless times. But this was different. This was respect given freely, without conditions, without judgment. Over the next few days, she noticed small changes in herself. She stood a little taller, her voice carried a little more when she spoke to customers. She began to notice the warmth in her own smile. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Each time he came in, each time he spoke kindly to her, it reminded her that she could be treated well. She didn't have to accept mistreatment as her normal. She had forgotten what that felt like. And now she was starting to remember. She began to reflect on the past, on all the times she had been ignored, dismissed, or ridiculed. She realized how long she had lived thinking that she had to earn respect through fear, perfection, or invisibility. The truth was, no one had ever just given her that respect. Not like him. It had been years since she felt that simple human dignity, and the absence had left a hollow space inside her. But now, slowly, it was filling up, just a little bit at a time. She started noticing other people in the store differently, too. The cashier who ignored her greetings, the customer who complained unnecessarily, the manager who walked past her without a word. They still behaved the same. But she felt less heavy carrying their negativity. The weight didn't disappear entirely, but it was easier to manage when she had even one person who treated her like she mattered at home. She replayed the day in her mind. She thought about how he had handled the situation with patience and kindness. He didn't need to be a hero. He didn't need to make a scene. He simply stood beside her, gave her support, and it was enough. She realized that sometimes helping someone didn't have to be grand or dramatic. Sometimes it was the small, consistent actions that left the deepest mark. She found herself thinking about him at unexpected moments, not in a romantic way, but in a way that made her consider what it meant to treat others with respect. She had spent so long assuming that people had to earn it, but he had shown her that respect could be offered freely, without expecting anything in return. It was a lesson she hadn't realized she needed until now. The little girl also played a part in this change. She was always curious, always asking questions, and always watching closely. Sometimes she would look at her and smile, or ask something simple about her day. She had never experienced that kind of attention before. Children were honest in their curiosity and warmth, and it reminded her that people could be kind without conditions. The girl's innocence and openness made the small interactions feel even more meaningful. One evening, after the store had closed, she stayed behind to finish a few tasks. The lights were soft, and the hum of the refrigerator filled the quiet space. He came in for a quick visit, checking if everything was all right, thanking her for her help. He didn't stay long, but his presence made her heart feel lighter, as if the world had expanded just a little. She locked the door behind him and realized that these small, everyday interactions were starting to change her. They were giving her hope, a sense that life could be different, that she could be treated with dignity and kindness. She thought about all the times she had believed that life was just about surviving, about keeping her head down and moving through the days unnoticed. That belief had kept her safe from disappointment, but had also kept her small, invisible. Now, she was starting to see that there was more to life than just enduring. There was room for recognition, for care, for the quiet reassurance that she mattered. Her coworkers didn't notice the change. They didn't know that she had started speaking a little more confidently, or that she held her head a little higher. They didn't know that a simple smile from him could brighten her entire week. They didn't understand that a quiet word of respect could change her perception of the world. But she didn't need them to. What mattered was that she had begun to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: validation. Human connection. The sense that she was seen and respected, even as the days passed. There were moments when doubt crept in. She wondered if she was imagining things, if she was reading too much into small gestures. But each time she interacted with him, the doubt melted away. His respect was consistent, steady, and unpretentious. It wasn't performative or conditional. It was real. And it reminded her that she didn't have to shrink herself to fit into a world that had often overlooked her. Sometimes, she caught herself smiling at memories of the day when he had stepped in for her, when he had defended her without expecting recognition. The memory was a small comfort, a reassurance that even in a world that could be harsh and indifferent, there were moments of grace. She carried that memory with her, tucked carefully in her chest. Ready to draw strength from it when she needed it most, she began to notice other subtle things too. The way her hands no longer shook as much when dealing with difficult customers. The way she responded to challenges with a little more confidence. The way she felt lighter at the end of the day. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but it was a shift, and it mattered. She realized that respect could have power, not just in the world, but within herself. It could help her reclaim parts of herself she had long neglected in those quiet moments. She understood that what he gave her wasn't just protection from rude words or harsh treatment. It was a reminder that she deserved dignity, that she had worth, that her voice mattered even when no one else acknowledged it. And that realization, though small at first, was growing stronger each day, shaping the way she carried herself, the way she spoke, and the way she saw her own life by the time she went home that night. Exhausted but hopeful, she felt a strange lightness. It was subtle, like a whisper, but it was real. She had begun to understand that respect didn't have to be earned through fear or silence. It could be given freely, and receiving it could be transformative. She thought about tomorrow, about the interactions she would have. And for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face the day, not just as someone surviving, but as someone beginning to feel alive again. Over time, she began noticing more about him. Not just the small acts of kindness, but the way he carried himself. He wasn't loud or flashy. He didn't boast or demand attention. There was a quiet strength in the way he moved, the way he spoke to the people around him, the way he treated his daughter with patience and care. It was subtle, but it made a difference. She began to wonder what life had been like for him to shape someone so calm, so grounded, so respectful. One afternoon, while restocking shelves, he came in as usual. He waved at her and smiled, and she returned it with a little more confidence than before. The little girl ran ahead, excited to show something to her father, and he laughed softly at her enthusiasm. Watching them together, she realized there was more to him than just politeness. There was compassion, patience, and an understanding of what it meant to face life with challenges, yet remain kind. She started to notice how he interacted with others. He helped elderly customers reach items on high shelves, spoke kindly to children who were scared or shy, and never made anyone feel small. He had a presence that made people naturally listen and respect him. She wondered what had shaped someone to be like that, someone so genuinely caring without asking for anything in return. One day, after he left, she found herself thinking about it more than usual. She wondered if he had always been like this, or if life had taught him lessons she hadn't learned yet. She imagined the possibility that he had faced hardships, challenges that could have broken him, yet he had chosen to carry himself with kindness. The thought struck her deeply. She realized she had never met many people like him, people who let their experiences make them better. It's not bitter. Later that week, the store became unusually hectic. Orders were coming in, the register lines grew long, and tempers flared. A customer started yelling over a small mistake she had made. Her heart pounded, her hands trembled, and she prepared for another round of scolding and dismissal. But before she could speak, he appeared. He calmly stood beside her, addressed the customer respectfully, and explained the situation in a clear, composed voice. The customer eventually walked away, grumbling, and she stood frozen for a moment, amazed. His calmness and confidence shielded her, but it was more than protection. It was a lesson in dignity. After the customer left, he smiled at her, not in a way that demanded gratitude, but in a way that simply acknowledged her presence. He didn't lecture, didn't make her feel inferior. He just treated her like she mattered. For the first time in a long while, she felt that respect wasn't conditional, that it wasn't something you had to earn through fear or perfection. It could simply be given. That realization began to shift something inside her. She started noticing changes in herself as well. Her posture improved, her voice became steadier when interacting with others, and she no longer flinched at criticism as much as she used to. Small victories, unnoticed by most, gave her confidence. The simple act of being treated fairly and kindly had a ripple effect on her sense of self-worth. She began reflecting on her own life, on the years of being overlooked and dismissed. She remembered coworkers who ignored her, customers who treated her like she didn't exist, and even her own belief that she had to survive without being noticed. But observing him, she realized that people could be shaped differently by their experiences. Hardship didn't have to make someone cruel or cold. It could make them thoughtful, patient, and understanding. That insight was new and enlightening. It sparked a quiet hope inside her. She started paying attention to her own interactions, trying to carry a little of what she learned from him into her own behavior. She smiled more at customers, spoke more clearly, and even started small conversations with coworkers, testing if they could be kind too. The changes were gradual, but they mattered. The simple idea that respect could exist in the world made her want to reflect it in her own actions. One evening, as she was closing the store, he stopped by for a quick visit. His daughter had already run ahead, eager to show something at home, and he took a moment to check if she was okay. He thanked her sincerely for her help that day and gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. That moment felt weighty, as if he had reminded her of something she had forgotten about herself, that she mattered, that her work mattered, that she deserved kindness and respect. After he left, she stayed behind to finish a few tasks. The store was quiet, the hum of the refrigerators the only sound, and she reflected on how much her perception of life was changing. She realized that small, consistent acts of kindness could be transformative. That being seen and respected could help someone reclaim pieces of themselves they had long ignored. She felt gratitude, not just for him, but for the realization that she could be treated well, that life could have moments of genuine care. In her apartment that night, she replayed the day in her mind. She thought about how he had stood beside her during a tense moment, how he had treated her with calm dignity, and how his example made her reconsider her own experiences. She realized that respect and kindness were not weaknesses, but powerful tools that could change lives. She began to understand that people could choose to be good even after facing challenges, and that choice could leave a lasting impact on those around them. She also thought about her own behavior and how she had spent so many years shrinking herself to fit into a world that often ignored her. She realized that she didn't have to remain invisible, that her voice, her presence, and her actions could carry weight. She could choose to be confident, to speak up, to expect respect from others. It was a new concept, one that felt both exciting and intimidating. The next few days continued in this pattern. She worked her shifts, interacted with customers, and observed him quietly, learning from his actions. She noticed how he balanced firmness with gentleness, how he addressed conflicts without aggression, how he treated his daughter and others with genuine care. Each interaction was a small lesson, a reminder that dignity and kindness were possible. Even in a world that often seemed indifferent, she began to notice herself holding on to hope more than before. Hope that life could be better, that people could treat her well, that small acts of respect could have lasting effects. She realized that she had been carrying years of invisible weight, and for the first time, she felt it lifting, even if only slightly. The world had not changed, but her perspective was shifting, opening space for trust and self-belief. One afternoon, she found herself smiling at a customer who had been rude the day before. It was a small victory, an internal acknowledgement that she was changing. She was learning to carry herself with confidence, to act with patience, and to expect fairness. She was realizing that her worth was not determined by the opinions of others, but by her own understanding of herself and by the respect she allowed herself to accept. Even the little moments became meaningful. A thank you from a customer, a smile from a colleague, a word of encouragement from someone unexpected. All of it felt amplified because she had begun to understand the value of respect. She realized that kindness was contagious, that observing it could inspire action, and that giving respect could be just as important as receiving it. As the days passed, her gratitude grew, not just for him, but for the simple lesson that people could be good, that dignity could exist, that small gestures could make a lasting difference. She began to look at her own life with a new perspective, appreciating small victories, moments of patience, and interactions that carried meaning. She understood that respect and care were not just abstract ideas, they were practical, actionable, and transformative. She carried these thoughts home each night, feeling a subtle but steady change. Her confidence grew, her self-worth strengthened, and her ability to interact with others improved. She realized that her life was no longer only about survival. It was about reclaiming herself, about noticing and valuing her own presence, and about recognizing that she deserved respect as much as anyone else. By the end of the week, she felt a quiet sense of empowerment. She knew that challenges would still come, that some people would continue to dismiss her or treat her poorly, but she no longer feared it in the same way. She had learned that respect could be given freely, that kindness could exist in unexpected places, that small acts could create ripples in one's life. She felt ready to face the world with this newfound understanding, carrying the lessons she had learned from him and from her own reflections, and in that quiet strength, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The days continued to pass, each one quietly shaping her in ways she had never imagined. She began to notice herself walking taller, speaking more confidently, and even smiling without feeling guilty for it. She had learned over time that kindness and respect were not weaknesses, but powerful reminders of what it meant to be human. And it was all because of someone who had chosen to see her when the world had mostly ignored her. One afternoon, as she was arranging items on the shelves, he came in with his daughter. They moved slowly, calmly, as if the rush of the world didn't touch them. He looked at her and nodded in greeting, and for the first time, she felt she could meet someone's gaze without fear or hesitation. The little girl waved and ran ahead to pick up a few things. And he smiled softly, letting her explore while keeping a careful eye. It was ordinary, simple, and yet it filled her with warmth. She remembered the first time he had entered the store and how different everything had seemed. The way he had spoken to her, the way he had made her feel seen, it had planted a small seed inside her that had grown steadily. She realized now how much she had changed since then. Not because the world had changed, but because she had allowed herself to be affected by genuine care. It had given her a sense of life she had long forgotten. That evening, she watched him help an elderly customer reach for a heavy item on the top shelf. He spoke to her quietly, politely, ensuring she felt included in the small task. She felt a rush of admiration for him, not for the heroics, but for the way he carried himself with integrity and patience. It was an example she had never had before, someone who led with kindness, who made others feel important without expecting anything in return. She began to reflect on her own life, on all the years she had spent invisible, quiet, trying to survive without being noticed. She realized that she had been holding herself back, letting the judgments and indifference of others define her. But now, she saw that it was possible to reclaim her sense of self, to exist in the world with dignity and to expect the same from others. The lessons she had learned from him were subtle, but they were profound. One evening, after the store had closed, she lingered behind the counter. The hum of the lights and the quiet buzz of the refrigerators filled the space. He came in for a brief visit, and she noticed the same calm, patient aura he always carried. He thanked her sincerely for her work, spoke kindly to his daughter, and left without fuss. It was a small, everyday moment, but it carried weight. It reminded her that life could hold simple, unspoken acts of respect that were more powerful than grand gestures. She thought about how much she had changed over the weeks. She spoke to customers without fear. She responded to rudeness with calmness. And she began to feel a sense of worth that wasn't dependent on others' opinions. She realized that respect had a ripple effect, that being treated well gave her the strength to treat herself well and to interact with others in a better way. It was a quiet revolution inside her life, shaping her in ways that were both subtle and deep. One day, a coworker made a mistake that could have caused tension. She remembered the example he had set, composed, respectful, and she approached the situation with patience and understanding. Instead of letting frustration take over, she helped the coworker resolve the issue with words that were gentle but firm. She saw the relief on their face, the gratitude that came without being spoken, and she felt a sense of pride. She had learned that respect and patience were tools, and she could wield them in her own life. At home that night, she reflected on how far she had come. She remembered the days when she had felt invisible, unheard, and unimportant. She thought about the moments when someone had yelled at her or ignored her, and she realized that while the world hadn't changed, her ability to face it had. She had learned that one person's genuine respect could change the way she saw herself, could inspire her to grow stronger and kinder, and could help her reclaim the dignity she had long forgotten. She began to carry herself differently in her daily life, not in a boastful way, but with quiet confidence. She noticed how her voice carried more authority when she spoke, how her gestures were more assured, and how her mind felt clearer when handling challenges. She understood now that respect wasn't something to be earned through fear or perfection, but something to accept and to give in return. The little girl's presence continued to be a reminder of innocence and honesty. She asked questions, smiled openly, and sometimes included her in small conversations. Those moments reminded her that simple connections could be powerful, that small gestures of attention could mean the world to someone who had long felt overlooked. It was a lesson in human connection, one that had quietly reshaped her perspective. She started noticing herself being more patient with customers, more understanding with coworkers, and kinder to herself. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it made a difference. Each day she applied the lessons she had learned from him, consciously or unconsciously, and it strengthened her sense of self-worth. She realized that genuine respect and kindness could be transformative, not just externally, but internally. Weeks passed, and her life felt different. She still had the same job, the same routines, and the same challenges, but she no longer felt small. She no longer carried the weight of invisibility so heavily. Each interaction with him, each moment of quiet respect, had helped her rebuild her confidence and self-respect. She understood that life could be hard, but how one met the challenges, how one treated oneself and others could change everything. One afternoon, as she finished her shift, he came in one last time for the week. He greeted her warmly, thanked her sincerely, and spoke kindly to his daughter. She felt a surge of gratitude and warmth. She realized that the impact he had made on her life went beyond the store, beyond the simple transactions of groceries and polite words. He had shown her a different way of existing in the world, a way of carrying oneself with dignity and respect. And that lesson would stay with her forever. She walked home that evening feeling lighter than she had in years. She remembered all the times she had believed she had to survive unnoticed, all the moments she had felt dismissed and unimportant. She realized that those days were behind her. She had been given a gift, not in material wealth or dramatic events, but in the form of respect, patience, and quiet kindness. It had changed her perspective, her confidence, and her life. At home, she sat by the window, looking at the city lights and reflecting on her journey. She thought about the simple fact that one person's respect could help someone rebuild themselves. She thought about the small victories, the lessons in patience, the quiet moments of human connection that had transformed her. She realized that life could be gentle, even in a world that often seemed harsh. She understood now that her worth was not defined by the opinions of others, nor by how much attention she received. Her value had always existed. It was just hidden under years of neglect and dismissal. The kindness and respect she had received had simply helped her see it again, had helped her remember that she deserved dignity and care. As she prepared for bed that night, she felt a deep sense of peace. She thought about tomorrow, about the new day and the interactions it would bring. She felt ready, no longer shrinking herself to fit a world that had often ignored her. She felt confident, seen, and respected. She realized that change didn't have to come from grand gestures or dramatic events. Sometimes the quiet, consistent presence of someone who treated you with kindness and dignity could transform a life quietly, steadily, and completely. And in that realization, she finally understood that she didn't have to be invisible anymore. She could be herself, she could expect respect, and she could carry it forward into her own interactions with the world. Life hadn't changed entirely, but she had. She had learned the true value of respect, the power of small acts of kindness, and the impact of being seen. And with that understanding, she felt hope, strength, and the quiet joy of knowing that she mattered.